really enjoyed, hearing the information that continues to evolve from all the speakers prior to both John and I. And what we wanted to do was take a little bit of time and introduce a tool that we've been working on internally, and we're referring to it as the Competency Assessment tool. And we'll talk, a little bit about the where to find it and how to use it. John will touch on what some of the key criteria are for being capable of understanding our logic behind, why it's and how it's making decisions for ultimately the feedback that you're getting from our organization. And I'll walk you through exactly what that looks like and what sort of information you'll get back. And I guess audiences is that the majority of the conversations that we have at Quality Associates really begin with some form of a consultative effort. And they generally are agencies that are coming to us wanting to expand on their understanding of how ready are we. And obviously, all of these agencies have taken action on responding to the RMSA report and getting feedback from NARA, but there still tends to be a gap, right, with the understanding of what information was submitted for purposes of that RMSA report and where the actual agency is in regards to their readiness. So let me take you through a little bit, or at least give you some information about this competency assessment tool. This tool, first of all, is very easy to use. That was one of our criteria for developing it. It's a 3 easy step program that shouldn't take you, more than maybe 10 or so minutes to fill out. The tool can be made available through our website, and so you can see the URL just above. As Troy mentioned to you, we've carved out not only the time and effort to begin developing tools like this, but there's tremendous amounts of information that we're gathering from the bridge meetings, that we're learning from the field, that our clients, quite frankly, are helping us to learn. We've been in the industry for decades, so the relationship that we have, for example, with all the partners that you saw a little bit earlier, has been ongoing for quite some time, and all of the best practices and so forth about getting all these folks involved and tackling various requirements, whether they're at the departmental level or they're at the enterprise level, are a traditional way of life, really, for us on a day-to-day basis. So this NARA Readiness Center that you see on this slide, you can see what some of the calls to action are that we've been working on internally. John and his team have been doing a tremendous amount around, publishing around our blog component. This estimator tool and the checklist and so forth is yet another effort to try and help our clients better understand, what their specific readiness looks like today. And I want to make it clear, I think I mentioned it earlier, that our checklist and our estimator and so forth is not a replacement to the RMSA report. NARA, in fact, is not involved at making any decisions about the information that you submit as it relates to this estimator of readiness. So this is an algorithm and logic and so forth that we're developing on our own back end. But what we believe it's helping with is some of the questions that are coming to us from the various agencies that we're working with, and being at sort of a lead role for becoming the thought leader to these policy changes and the ultimate, how and when an agency is expected to respond to these types of things. All of that has been cooked into the logic of how we're giving people results for using this tool. So I just grabbed a couple screenshots from what the progression of the steps would look like. The how ready are you is really the headliner behind where to get started. The step 1, taking the actual assessment test, is the second picture that's located there, and then ultimately the how does the readiness score estimator work. And John's going to be talking a little bit more about the 10 key criteria that we're using to help with that score. I guess ultimately where you want to be is within the range of what this illustration is suggesting. The above target would be a great spot. Really what we want to try to do is to give the agency a realistic assessment based on this very short exercise to provide us with information on where the agency is likely to be in regards to readiness. A couple of the presentations earlier, that broke down what readiness looks like. And I think it's important really to understand that we have a handful of customers and clients that are really using the M1921 policy change to completely invite a new strategy to managing information within the agency. So the term modernization, I think, was used several times earlier. We've seen that approach taken by the agency, that this is an opportunity to unveil and uncover new plans and new initiatives to modernize. The partners talked a little bit about the use of technology for purposes of modernization, but it's a human process change. It's a conceptual process change. It's an introduction of new technology. So there's a lot of moving parts in all of this. It's not just how to identify permanent records and how in the very near future do we take on these large digitization projects, deal with the right components around classifying metadata and get this information to NARA effectively. So clearly there's a lot more to it, and we're finding that there's disparity in what each of the agencies are deciding to do. So with a lot of that in mind, we've tried to scale down the questions and so forth to really focus on what does the readiness piece look like in order to meet the compliance requirements. Something else I've been monitoring throughout the course of the discussion, what some of the questions have been about, how do I get our agency better aligned with leadership's attention to all of this? And this is a question that comes up quite regularly that invites the competency of QAI's expertise to help the folks that we're dealing with get closer to their leadership about the function of their readiness. So we've built this tool as an example of why organizations need to better understand what their readiness is, because it's really that gap that needs to be brought to the attention of executive leadership. There's a funding component. If you choose to outsource some of these requirements, there's a timeline that's associated with becoming ready. There's a whole means of expertise, right, around the evaluations of technology and the people that are going to do that. And then, coupling all those things together, there's an expectation of an outcome. And we've developed a plan and a process internally that we refer to as EDGE 22. And you can see on my slide specifically what it means: educate, document, generate, and execute. These are 4 easy steps that our clients today are taking. I suggest that they're easy from this perspective that we try to make them easy, but there's a lot of complexities that live in between each and every one of these steps. Identifying, a plan for getting leadership's attention is certainly something that occurs between the educate and the document phase. So just want to address that area. It is something, if you've been on the chat, it is something that is getting a lot of popularity in today's series. So again, the slide here is an example of what you will receive from us. It'll come in via email, and your overall readiness score, and hopefully you score very high. But if not, I think there's truth, right, in the gap that I'm talking about between where the agency actually is and our algorithms trying to determine, the reality of where your agency is. So some of this information I think will be helpful to get back to some of your key leadership. I'm going to move the conversation now over to John. John's going to talk specifically around these 10 areas of competency that we're focused on. And I think our plan is to go back and forth a little bit just to talk about the realities of the things that we're experiencing on a day-by-day basis with becoming a thought leader. Take it away, John.
All righty. If you could just hit the next slide. There we go. Hi, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here with all of you today. I don't see my camera up, so the engineers might want to switch me over to the video at this point. But, it's fashionable right now to talk about what did you have on your 2020 bingo card? And, talk about, we live in unprecedented times and, all the rest of that bit, all the different things that you couldn't have possibly predicted being on your 2020 bingo card. Well, there's a thing that I would challenge if this was on anybody's 2020 bingo card, which is that you would have an M1921 seminar that would have 1,200 registrations and 600 or 700 simultaneous viewers on records management. And the reason I say that, if you had that on your bingo card, you're a far smarter person than I am, because I've been doing this a long time, as many of you know, first in the name umbrella and now in kind of an independent umbrella. And, it's really an interesting time. I don't think I could have possibly predicted that there would be this kind of resonance for a topic like this. And so that really got me thinking a little bit about why that is. And, I think some of the reasons are that we've come to the realization that, this M1921 isn't really just about a box checking exercise, which even if it started that way, that isn't really what I think people are taking away from it. What they're taking away from it is, some of the things that Pat and April and Sunny and Beth and some of the other speakers talked about. It's a pathway to modernization. It's a discipline associated with modernization. And the realization that in this era that we're in, this digital era, and the punctuation point has been put on it by some of the things that folks like Cynthia talked about during her presentation, is that if you are not a digital enterprise, you're not an enterprise anymore. If you're not a digital agency, you're not an agency that can really respond to unexpected circumstances. And so in that light, I think what I tried to do when I started thinking about these core competencies is I read through all the SORM reports. I read through all the RIMSA reports. Fabulous work. It's such an awesome job that NARA has done in establishing baselines associated with competency, which didn't really exist before. And I think we're starting to see the benefit of that. But I think the thing that I wanted to highlight about that when I read through all those reports is that, there's a lot of information in there. And so what I tried to do is distill down some of the competencies associated with being a mature digital organization. And the reason for that is that, this is not just a box checking exercise. This is far more comprehensive than that. And so these were some of the things that occurred to me as I went through the RIMSA report. And you'll see when I go through each of these, the data that I drew from some of to illustrate each of these comes directly from the RIMSA report. It's not, these aren't NARA's 10 things, but this is kind of my take based on 20 years of having done this, of some of the issues I think that folks need to think about as they modernize their agencies and as they think about this as a far more comprehensive framework rather than something that just, will get you into compliance. The other thing that occurred to me, and the other reason I wanted to do this and maybe ping Scott a bit to talk about some real life examples, is I think there's a gap out there right now. And I see this, it's not just a government function, it's in the private sector as well. It's a gap that exists between intentions and actual operational effectiveness. And so, when I look at some of the evaluations that people are drawing out of the RIMSA reports and out of the SORM reports, and, the percentage of people that are in low risk and high risk and medium risk categories, it struck me that there seems to be a dissonance there between what people are saying in terms of readiness and the reality that exists when we go and talk to folks. And when I thought about that, I think it has something to do with the fact that when you think about any content management or records management project, it has a couple of different phases associated with it. It has the strategy phase, it has the policy phase, it has building an operational plan against those policies, it has deploying the systems that basically make implementation of the operational plan possible, and then it's implementation at large scale. And so I think lots of times when we ask questions that, are you planning for records readiness? Do you have a strategy for records readiness? That's a very different data point than, are you actually operating at scale in an automated records fashion right now? And so that duality, I guess, between intention and reality is kind of what I wanted to probe a little bit here. So let me just walk through each of these. I'm going to stop along the way for 3 or 4 of them and ask for Scott to give a couple of real-life examples. And again, the data points are just illustrative from the RMSA report last year, because I wanted to just kind of put a little bit of reality into each of these. So next slide, Scott. So I think the first thing that seems to me to be an element in a mature records management environment is whether the program itself is subject to examination and re-examination at periodic intervals. In other words, are you conducting regular audits? Are you conducting regular evaluations? Are you validating what's in your records inventory? And so the data that came back from the RMSA reports last year is that 36% of agencies, that's a pretty good swath of agencies, need to update their records directives in order to bring them up to current speed. And so, I think that's a hugely telling data point, because that's the first starting point in accountability, is to basically have record schedules that are up to date, that are able to be audited, that can be evaluated in a meaningful way moving forward. Second point. Second thing, and I'm going to ask Scott to comment on this one a little bit too, is that once you have established up-to-date schedules, is this idea of what are the clear metrics in order to evaluate performance. And you can see here that 3 out of 4 agencies say they've established records management performance goals. Again, I think this is a bit optimistic in terms of what this really means when you get into an operational environment at massive scale. Is very much more challenging than some of the intentional things that you might have from an aspirational perspective. But I think this is a clear indicator for me of a program that has some roots and has some resonance to it, is whether there are clear metrics associated with how the program is performing and how it's operating. And so, Scott, why don't you just comment a little bit about this from folks that you have talked with?
Yeah, sure, John. So there's so many things that potentially can be measurable, sort of quantitatively as to what the success criteria are to look like in regards to the agency preparing for what we're calling, ready to adopt this change. We've seen, I guess one of the things I want to mention too with this question around, clear metrics is the reality, right, of taking on what truly is to become this level of effort. I mean, we're working today with some very large federal agencies, and it's taking us months with a lot of people on the ground, both our consultants along with their undivided teams, their RM teams, to just make a determination as to the, what records, right, are deemed to be permanent and what records are deemed to be temporary. So this is a significant effort in many cases, and it's not that the organization isn't prepared or, for that matter, organized, but to collectively get it all into one place so that we can properly assess what the plan looks like to move forward is the real large undertaking. The Iron Mountain partner earlier talked about a disposition schedule, right? So once we make a determination as to what is going to fall within this digital conversion project or the scope of it, we then invite the consideration of what becomes, potentially destroyed. So metrics are really key. We've been working on a lot of different formulas and plans and templates and so forth that we've been sharing with our clients to try and get the client, more ready to deal with metric and the quantitative metric, right? Not the departmental one or the institution one, or but what is the agency doing to track some of these clear areas that are going to become key criteria for the success of the agency as a whole. I mentioned a few of them. There's really a long list of things. I want to mention as well the other area that I think is very, very important to the success of the agency would be the understanding of the changes that are likely to take place with their staff, right? So what criteria are involved with ensuring that the staff are prepared to deal with these changes as well. And this really falls to mostly the folks on the RM side or the information management side. So, John, that would be my feedback thus far from sort of what's happening in the field.
Terrific. Switch to the next one, please, Scott.
Sure.
This next area that I chose to put on here, I was trying to think, the reason I selected this one is that, every agency has FOIA complexities associated with their daily operations. And so, I think what's really important is to put records capabilities directly in the context of that process. And the reason I say that is that I've seen many organizations view records management as something of an abstract rather than something that is ingrained and critical to the performance of a key business process. And it strikes me that FOIA responsiveness is really a very, very core process for government. It's something that's a way more complex process in these, as we say, these uncertain times right now, and with decentralized people and people not necessarily on site. And how do you go about this? And as you can see, there are gaps there. And so it struck me that this question of FOIA responsiveness is an important element in M1921 preparedness. Next one. This question of integrated controls. So the question that the RIMSA survey asked last year, which I thought was really interesting, is are records and information in your agency managed throughout the life cycle? And so the key components there are, it's not just a point in time when it comes to managing records. It's not just a binary thing, whether a record is declared or not declared. It's how are you managing information from the point at which it's ingested in the organization to how it is classified, how it is maintained, how it is retained, and ultimately how is it disposed of. And it's a question that gets beyond just records into the overall strategy for information management. And the reason I brought this one up is because I think it's impossible to separate records management from information management. I know they're different. I know there's different characteristics of each, but it seems like they're kind of they're twins of each other. They go directly hand in hand. And so if you don't have those internal controls as part of your core infrastructure, ultimately, in the context of information lifecycle, you're going to have challenges moving forward. Next slide. The fifth one I thought about is, and golly, just about every speaker has talked about this, is that, and I like to refer to this as, this is the elephant in the room in transformation strategies, is that, no matter who you speak with, whether it is a government agency or a private sector organization, there is always this tail of paper that is just dragging down. And how do you expect to perform as a digital organization, as a digital agency, unless you figure out some strategy to digitize that tail? And so, Scott, I know you guys have rich experience in this vein. So why don't I just ask you to comment on this one a little bit?
Okay, thanks, John. I think we heard a little bit earlier from Dave with GSA about their consideration of outsourcing these digital conversion projects. We see every flavor imaginable of approaches towards this type of effort. Some are brought in-house. Others are day-forward projects that are outsourced by vendors that do this kind of work, such as people like ourselves. Some of the work is taken off site, right, to go into large imaging centers, depending upon the volume of this type of work. But the thing that if you haven't ever been involved in this type of work, I guess having multiple decades of experience in this line of work specifically is these are not easy projects. And I know at the surface level, they might just seem like we're going to convert this stuff and once we're done, we'll have this digital product and it'll be classified correctly and all that kind of thing. Well, the reality of it is that this material that we get our hands on typically has lots of different conditions, which, require us to use lots of different devices, and it requires us to use lots of different image enhancement softwares and so forth to get the digital outcome and the product and the quality that we're looking for. So it's a very process-oriented program that in order to deal in these high volumes and quick turnarounds, there's really a need for some significant expertise to understand what it is that you're doing. The comment earlier, John, came up about how expensive this type of service is, and I wouldn't disagree, I guess, from the surface that it can be something that's perceived to be expensive. However, there are a lot of ways to mitigate that cost too, and one of the ways I'll suggest is having the agency co-participate in the actual effort itself. So, purging out duplicates and getting the records ready for the scanning process. I think it was mentioned earlier that what makes these projects expensive is that there's a lot of time and labor involved in doing that. And so if we can share some of the responsibilities of how to reduce that time and labor, particularly for that of what is outsourced to a vendor, obviously it also helps to reduce the cost of the overall program and project. Volume, obviously, is another key contributor to cost. So if there's way to reduce volume, obviously this can be another area for how we reduce costs. So the thing I'll leave you with for item number 5 is there are a lot of approaches to this. They are typically very complex projects, but there are ways to mitigate cost, and there definitely are folks out here, I think, that really understand what they're doing, and there's folks that would like to think that they understand what they're doing, and you have to be a little bit cautious as to how you make a determination as to who the right fit might be for your program and your project.
Yeah, and I think as you move on to the next slide, Scott, the other aspect of that one that really strikes me, it came up in the industry panel earlier, is that there is a balancing act that organizations and agencies have to forge between the backfile conversion and the day forward strategy. And lots of times people can get sucked into, it's like a boat that has a hole in the bottom of it. And as information comes into the organization, you've got to get ahead of that curve or else you're never going to catch up. And so that balancing act and how you determine that strategy becomes really important. So this one, I think, is really interesting to me, which is this notion of seamless records management, regardless of location. So, this is a degree of, we talked about the hybridness of paper and electronic and paper and digital. There's also a hybridness that's going to exist in most organizations between on-prem and cloud. Clearly, the emphasis is shifting to the cloud. I think there's an awful lot of benefit associated with the cloud that we didn't have with on-prem solutions. That was touched on in some of the panels earlier. But even in something like email, the reason I put this data point up was I thought it was interesting, is even for something like email that most of us think about in cloud terms right now. Only 60% of agencies, according to the RIMSA reports, have 100% cloud solution for email. So if it's hybrid there, it's going to be hybrid just about everywhere. And so your strategy needs to bridge across the two. Next one. This question of automated ingestion, I think, is for me, golly, this is one of the most important things moving in forward, is what is your strategy for capturing information as it comes into the organization? And the reason I mention this as so important is that I've been continue to do a lot of research for AIM. I write some of their research reports moving forward, and there are 2 data points that I've asked probably 500 or 600 senior information management people over the last 6 months. These same 2 questions, And the first question is, if the current volume of information coming into your organization is X, what do you think it's going to be in 2 to 3 years? And the answer comes back something between 4 and 4.5X. And then a second question ask them is, okay, what percentage of that stuff is structured, in other words, data, and what percentage is unstructured or semi-structured? You know, for those of us in the content space, it's content and documents and images and all that. And they say basically they expect for 60% of that 4.5X to be unstructured and semi-structured. So my point there is lots of volume, lots of variety, and if you don't figure out how to categorize that as it comes in, you'll never catch up. Next slide.
John, I would just want to give us a time check. Being shared with our moderators that we got to get moving along here.
Yep. The last three, just to kind of touch on it, first of all, is this question of baked in records functionality. You know, and when the RMSA reports nearly 30% of agencies do not design in records management, if it's a bolt-on, it's not going to be successful. And so you need to, as you modernize your strategy, you need to think about how records management is incorporated into the guts of a system. Next one. This question of future-proofing, and the way I think about this data point is, you know, what are the policies and procedures associated with migration? You know, we're in a complicated world right now in which things are changing extremely rapidly. And so do you have a strategy specifically focused on migrating and future-proofing your systems? And Scott, I think you wanted to chat just a tiny bit about this one.
Well, I just want to make sure that, you know, depending upon what agency you're working from, the feedback that we're getting from a lot of the agencies we're working with is not to just deal with, you know, what NARA is looking for, which is, you know, a digital, you know, transformation of content coming from the agency for, you know, post 12/31/22. But that most of these agencies are bringing on a modernization strategy. And so this introduction of the partners that we saw today is just an example of all these different things that could be taken into consideration, because I don't think that it ends with just a plan around, you know, digitizing, you know, records, but, you know, where are they going to live and how are we going to access them and how are we going to classify them in the future and what tools and solutions are going to be used to do that. So, you know, this has really broadened, I think, the role and responsibility of the agency to become compliant. And I think that's the point, John, that you're ultimately trying to make here.
And the last one here is this question of transfer readiness. Ultimately, this all comes down to how are records and information ascensioned into NARA? You know, do they have appropriate metadata associated with it? I think this transfer readiness also gets to the heart of some of the issues that NARA is raising right now in terms of characteristics of permanent records, and that whole rule keeping that is underway right now becomes a really important thing moving forward. But again, this is the ultimate end game of M1921 is, are you ready to transfer both those permanent and temporary records in electronic format with all the associated metadata? And Scott, I'll leave it to you to close out here.
Well, thanks, John. So if you get an opportunity, the URL that's on this slide at the very bottom of it is, of course, how you would go about accessing our competency assessment tool. There's no cost and there's no association with any of this kind of thing. It's really, you know, the experiences and so forth that we're gaining. We wanted to go through what those competency tools are that are helping us to provide the score that's ultimately made available from the input that you provide. So again, just want to mention this is not a substitution of the RMSA report. It is QAI's version of a compliance readiness tool, and it's really being developed based on the experiences and so forth that we're having with each of our clients that are all after the same thing. They're just approaching it a little bit differently, and many of them are in a lot of different positions and so forth. So, yeah, we hope to see you out there and taking our estimator.
Excellent.
Troy, thanks for the time. This has been great.
Yeah,
and we'll continue to stay logged in here.
Yeah, and a couple questions. A lot of the questions that came in while you were talking were about the assessment tool, and I think you addressed those, or your colleagues in the chat room answered them. One that came up, you may have touched on this in the presentation, but just to reiterate, is the assessment tool coordinated with NARA in any way?
No, it's not. The way that you should think about this is that we read through all of the different NARA reports, and we were trying to think of a way not only to help agencies standardize what they do, but also, frankly, to help internal to QAI figure out, okay, well, what is important? How are we going to focus on this? How are we going to help people lead them through a strategy session? And so it was our interpretation of some of the factors there. It's not a NARA report. I think the NARA work is awesome, but it is our interpretation of that.
Okay. And another question that came in was about sort of other auditing tools, and whether NUA could recommend a program auditing tool that could be used to make sure that the electronic records management protocol is effective.
That's a good question. Yes, there are, and we probably should address that offline. It's probably too much to go into right now. There's a lot of great work that ARMA has done in this regard, and maybe I could just pick whoever that is up, pick that up with a follow-up question.
Absolutely. Well, I know, John, you were in the chat room earlier. You can pop back in there in a few minutes, and we'll go. And a question that I wanted to bring into this discussion was about something I asked the other industry partners, which is whether agencies are approaching this in a holistic manner. Are you seeing them sort of thinking about this kind of full strategic level, or are you still being brought in at the specific problem level and having to work with them to expand the aperture?
John, I'll grab that one. I think so. We're seeing a range of just about everything. I think the examples where we see their leadership getting involved sooner than later, there are definitely steps being made towards the defining of what the levels of effort are, and the acknowledgement of what the gaps are in their overall strategy, which is leading them in many cases to an acquisition strategy to bring life to a partnership with a potential private sector organization or whatever the case might be. But the other tough part is we're seeing a lot of records managers that are very, very active and making a great effort to try and gather the right information and get it into the hands of senior leadership. And in some cases, they're just simply, becoming active, right? And maybe not getting the undivided attention that they deserve. And in other cases, they're working diligently. They're going about it in a very formal manner, and they're introducing it to senior level management, who at that point can become actionable based on the information that they've been presented. And I think that's a really key takeaway is, what information am I expected to get within this short amount of time to get leadership's attention on all of this, right? Because just with this one series, you see how many moving parts are involved in so many of the things that are critical to becoming successful at this. So overall, Troy, the answer is we're seeing a wide range of things, but the one thing that I'll suggest is those that are getting prepared now or having been prepared earlier are definitely in a far different position of meeting this timeline than those that are waiting.
Troy, there used to be a thing in the environmental movement years ago where they would say act globally, or think globally and act locally. And so I think in this regard, it's, think strategically, but implement tactically. And I think the thing that M1921 gives folks is that it doesn't just have to be a collection of local tactics. it can be connected to that overall objective of digital maturity and digital effectiveness. And that's where the future lies. And I think that's why maybe there's so much excitement in this and interest in this topic right now.
Absolutely. And John, I think that's a great place to leave this segment of the event, and knowing that we'll be coming back to it again. But thanks both of you for sharing your thoughts, and especially for sharing this assessment tool with the audience.